One of my favorite lines from the Second Vatican Council, I think it was in Gaudium et Spes, it says, when God is forgotten, the creature itself becomes unintelligible.
That's right. That is absolutely right. That's the last chapter of this book. I mean, the last chapter of this book is what happened to art. It's a tour through a make-believe museum using real paintings and what happens to art and the body as we lose our faith, you know.
Talk about that, because we've all seen kind of abstract art. Now, I don't want to immediately write abstract art off. Sometimes I'll see some paintings that you could mock and say a 2-year-old did it, but sometimes I think, yeah, it's good for people experimenting, whatever.
Yeah.
But, we've all seen art. You're like, this is a much worse place because this thing is in it. So how did we get to that? And
I think that the retreat into materialism, which is a real thing, and I think we're all, we're not free of it, even though we're believers. It infects our minds.
Yep.
The retreat into materialism is a retreat into mental illness, to look at the world as if it were just objects. And, what they call scientism, the idea that everything can be figured out in a material way, is mentally ill. And I think all of us partake in this mental illness. And so if you look at, and since art is the conscience of our kind, art represents the collective conscience, it plays out in art. So I start out in this museum tour with the creation from the Sistine Chapel, and it's this incredible thing. But inside of God is kind of shaped in this robe that is both in the shape of a brain and of a womb. And, it's in the shape of both. And you can chart it and I can show it to you and all this. And in that womb is Eve. And she's not born yet. She's just in his imagination. And as he's giving life to Adam, she is waiting in the imagination.
Yeah.
And what happens to the female body in the course of the next 500 years is that it disappears. It actually disappears. First it becomes abstract. First it becomes nude. That's the first thing. It loses its majesty. It's instead of being the Virgin Mary, the Virgin Mary becomes humanized, which is very, very beautiful. And then nudity comes along, and I point out that Shakespeare has a little passage where he uses classical art about nudes in classical subjects as pornography. And what he's basically saying is, you think it's real noble art, but it's actually pornographic. And then over time, as the idea of God disappears, you get the impressionism and the abstraction where we cease to trust our own perception. Our perception becomes a lie, an illusion, which it would have to be because we perceive ourselves as selves, right? And that, as you say, the creature disappears if God disappears. And so it must be an illusion that we're a self. I'm just a machine that's sitting here and AI can replace me and all this nonsense that we believe. And that is all in the paintings. It's all in the paintings. The female body specifically falls apart. And by the end of it, you get, Jackson Pollock sprinkling paint. And as you say, it's not like it represents the time, so it has some value. It shows us to ourselves. But when we see ourselves in that, we should be horrified. Instead of giving the guy $1 million, we should be going to a collective psychiatrist and sort of curing this mental illness. And it ends with a blank canvas, that hilarious. It was hilarious. They gave this guy money, like $80,000, something like that, and said, we want you to paste this on a canvas and to show us the world is materialist. So he handed in a blank canvas and he called the painting, "Take the Money and Run." And he said, my work of art is I took the money. I just thought, good for you, son, You finally figured out modern art.
You guys have got to check out 7 Weeks Coffee. They are pro-life, mold-free, organic. The coffee is delicious. Go to 7weekscoffee.com. Click the link in the description. And also down there, you'll figure out how you can save 25% off your first order. 7weekscoffee.com.
And so it takes me back at the end. It takes me back to the Pietà. That's where the book ends, is with the Pietà, because here you have the ultimate female figure basically at the ultimate moment of her passion, I guess we would call it. And it speaks of everything, and yet it speaks of how even the horror of life is beautiful.
Yeah, we call it Good Friday.
Yeah.
In another one of your books, it was a Cameron Winter mystery. There's this excellent line in there that I read it, and it's always stuck with me. He's talking to his therapist, I believe. You can correct me if I'm wrong. And he talks about his fornications of the past, and he said something like, they were just shapes to me.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that for all of its exposure, pornography doesn't expose. It actually suppresses the subject
Yeah.
and leaves us with the shell.
It's poison.
And I think that's a good distinction, perhaps, between, say, the body being depicted, say, at the Sistine Chapel or some other painting that's done beautifully, is that there's an inner life to the subject that you're drawn into.
Yeah.
Whereas lust doesn't want that. Like, I'm not interested in your feelings, your inner world, your freedom.
Yeah.
I just want the body.
Yeah.
So it seems, I think that's, again, this is difficult to kind of spell out because a lot of this is subjective. But I would say that if a fella went to the Sistine Chapel and did in fact lust over Michelangelo's nudes, that wouldn't be a sign that Michelangelo's nudes were pornographic.
That's right.
Or that what he painted was wrong. It should set off alarm bells that there's something profoundly wrong in the individual who sees them as such.
That's right. I mean, speaking of that form thing, there's a show on called White Lotus that I've just watched. It's about these rich people who go to different hotels in each season.
Okay.
And it's very clever show. But it had a speech in this third season. Sam Rockwell, one of my favorite actors, delivers the speech where he says, I went to Thailand. This one took place in Thailand, and I just slept with. And he said, I've always had a thing for Asian girls, and I just slept with Asian girls. And then he goes on, unrepeatable, obscene speech.
Yeah.
And he said, and then I start to think, because all he was doing was just having sex. He said, I started to think, what is this? Like, why do I care? Because her form is the opposite of mine. It's just a form, these shapes. Why is it shape? And then he says, I think I wanted to be the Asian girls. And he ends up, of course, having gay sex and having people watch her. And it just gets more. And I thought, like, that's a great speech. I mean, that you talk about an obscene speech that's also a great speech, because what he's saying is if you don't individualize the person you're making love to the point where you give them your life, essentially, if you don't do that, then you've actually lost yourself. You disappear, because we're all looking for something that's inside us. We're all looking to fill something inside us. And if it just becomes physical, then what's the difference between that and porn? What's the difference between having sex with 1 million women and watching porn, which is ultimately a form of impotence,
Thanks very much for watching that clip. You can click the link below if you want to watch the full interview, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.